Good morning, everybody. 2025 has been a pretty great year for flying. Started this channel back in January, and together, if you can believe it, we have flown into 45 different airports across the Mid-Atlantic region together. We've landed at airports on the banks of rivers. We've landed at lakeside airports. We've even landed at airports on top of mountains. Long paved strips, short grass, backyard airports, you name it, we've done it. So I thought today it'd be fun to take a look back at the 10 most fun airports that we flew in together. I don't have any hard and fast criteria for this. These are airports that I just thought were, for me, pretty darn fun to fly into. Maybe it's because they had a quirk with the runway that means it's not your standard landing and had to use a little bit of skill. Maybe they are airports that had super scenic approaches, giving you a nice, beautiful view as you come in for a landing. Or maybe there's just something unique or fascinating about that particular airport. In any event, for me, these were the most fun airports that we flew in together in 2025.
Kicking things off at number 10 is Greater Breezewood, just outside of Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite strips for a few reasons. First of all, it's in a really beautiful area surrounded by mountains, forest, and farmland, and it has enough going on to keep things interesting. The runway has a pretty good slope to it, so you're typically going to land going uphill on runway 3 and take off going downhill on runway 21. Runway 3 is also a right-hand pattern, so the downwind leg brings you pretty close to that terrain you see off to the right there. Now, when I land at Breezewood, I'll typically land long since I'm going to have to take off from the other end of the runway anyway. If you're a pilot looking to expand your skill set, Breezewood is a great first step toward building a little mountain flying experience. While it has a little bit of everything, it's also pretty docile. It's got mountains, but they're not that big. The runway is sloped, but it's also 3,000 feet long, and the trees are closer in than you'll find at most other airports, but the runway is also very wide, so there's plenty of margin for error here. Overall, Breezewood is just a really fun strip to fly into. And coming in at number 9 is Virginia's Tangier Island, right in the middle of Chesapeake Bay. If you like water views, Tangier offers one of the prettiest approaches in the region, and there's even a shipwreck right offshore as you turn onto the base leg for runway 2. Now, there are no bridges or commercial air service out to the island. The only way to get here is either by boat or to fly yourself in, or at least find a friend with a plane. Now, the strip itself is pretty straightforward, but it is subject to some pretty good crosswinds, as you might imagine. Probably the most challenging part about landing here is the nearly 1,200-foot displaced threshold for runway 2, with the old runway markings showing through. That may not only mess up your sight picture, but could also lead to a flat tire if you aren't paying close attention and land short. There's also restricted airspace for the Navy bombing range less than a mile to the west, so maintaining solid situational awareness here is a must. It's also the reason that you make right traffic for runway 2. Tangier itself is a traditional fishing village with just over 300 full-time residents, and it doesn't get a ton of tourist traffic. It's a unique experience for sure. This place is definitely worth a special trip, but just make sure you check out business hours for the restaurants and shops ahead of time, as I found out the hard way. And next up at number 8 is Center Airpark in Center Hall, Pennsylvania, just outside of State College. Now, located smack in the middle of the state, this is just a classic farm strip where you're essentially landing in the middle of a cornfield. When I flew in, I really didn't know what to expect besides what I had read in the FAA Chart Supplement, but I was pleasantly surprised, and then some. The owners maintained this field in pristine condition, and the grass was in amazing shape, full, green, and perfectly manicured. The runway surface was nice and smooth as well. None of that rocking around that makes you feel like you're going to pop a rivet or two that you get at some grass strips. Now, I didn't realize this before landing, but like Breezewood, the runway here actually has a pretty good slope to it. I landed going downhill on runway 24, but with 3,100 feet of available length, getting slowed down wasn't a problem. Though the next time I fly in, I'll definitely land going uphill on runway 6. This one is definitely a treat that gives you a sense for what it must have been like to fly during the golden age of aviation, when farm strips like this were the rule, not the exception. At number 7 is Mexico Farms in Cumberland, Maryland. This is an old airmail strip that first opened over 100 years ago, so it's got some history to it. It's Maryland's oldest grass strip, and both Charles Lindbergh and Howard Hughes have actually landed here. Now, it lies in a bottomland along the Potomac River, and you're actually straddling the Maryland-West Virginia border when you fly the base leg. Mexico Farms is also just 1,800 feet south of Greater Cumberland Regional Airport on the bluff above. And as you just saw, Turning base to final for runway 9 at Mexico Farms also aligns you perfectly with runway 5 at Greater Cumberland. With both airports being so close, they thankfully share a common traffic advisory frequency. Now, it's really important to make regular position calls and listen carefully so you have a solid picture of everything that's going on. Luckily, on the day I flew in, I was the only plane in either traffic pattern. The 2,100-foot grass runway here is in really great shape, and it's just a pleasure to land on. Now, as you depart, do be mindful that you're climbing up under the traffic pattern for Greater Cumberland. So again, paying attention to the CTAF is key to safe operations. Now, the uniqueness of this place, being so close to a much larger airport, the gorgeous scenery and the history here all make Mexico Farms a fun little strip. Kee Field in Pineville, West Virginia is our number 6 most fun landing of 2025. This one actually surprised me a little bit. After checking it out on Google Earth, I could see that it was in a bit of a valley, but the terrain here was definitely more impressive than I expected. This 3,700-foot strip lies in a hollow with some fairly steep slopes on either side and rising terrain at either end. So making a stable approach here means you have to be comfortable flying in proximity to trees and hills. That terrain also means the winds are a little squirrely, and as you're about to see here, I was hit with some unexpected wind shear just as I was about to touch down. Departing Kee means that you have to fly toward rising terrain no matter which direction you go. With variable winds on this day, I chose to take off on runway 26, since the Stream Valley offered a good option if my climb performance wasn't what I hoped for. Kee Field is definitely a legitimate mountain airport, and I would not recommend flying in here unless you're confident of you and your plane's abilities. I know I definitely think twice about flying in here on a hot, humid summer afternoon myself. Now, bringing us into the top 5 is Ingalls Field in Hot Springs, Virginia. Ingalls sits right on top of a mountain in the eastern Alleghenies, making for a spectacular approach no matter what direction you're flying in from. With a field elevation of nearly 3,800 feet, it's also the highest public airport east of the Mississippi River. Now, if you do decide to fly in here, there are a few things to watch out for. First, with the airport surrounded on all sides by valleys, it creates a little bit of an optical illusion, and I usually feel like I'm lower than I actually am. And with the airport perched atop a ridge, it's susceptible to all kinds of swirling winds. Ingalls is notorious for wind shear, and the bottom may drop right out from under you on short final. As you can see, shorting the runway here would lead to a very bad day. So I'll typically plan to land long to give myself a nice, comfortable safety margin to deal with those inevitable wind shifts. Now on this day, the wind actually did the opposite to me, shifting from a crosswind to a straight headwind that kept me from descending. Views from the airport are amazing, and the hold short line for runway 25 is one of the prettiest hold short lines in the east. Now when you're taking off from runway 25, the wind will often deflect off that peak you see on the left, so be ready to react quickly since the wind may grab you from unexpected directions. Coming in at number 4 is another old airmail strip, Sunbury Airport in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. This one sits on a small island in the middle of the Susquehanna, and the approach for runway 23 brings you right down the center of the river, with the runway extending nearly to the water's edge. This field is surrounded on all sides by campgrounds, so you're guaranteed to always be landing with an audience. Now luckily the runway here is pretty generous at over 3,200 feet long and a whopping 250 feet wide, so there's no need to rush your landing. Take your time and enjoy a nice, slow, soft touchdown. The field here isn't the smoothest, but it's not terrible either, and the owners have been working to rehab it for the past couple of years. In fact, you can see a little bit of that work going on along the runway's southeast side over on the left. Now, do be sure to check your NOTAMs before you fly in, as the field is usually only open in the warmer months, and even then it does close down from time to time. With winds light and variable on this day, I decided to head out the same way that I came in. The departure off of runway 5 once again brings you right down the middle of the river and offers some incredible views of central Pennsylvania. Up next at number 3 is Falwell Airport in Lynchburg, Virginia. Now, on paper, this airport doesn't seem like anything special with its 2,900-foot paved runway, just like lots of small-town airports across the country. But what really sets Falwell apart is its dramatic grade. The runway looks more like a ski slope than a landing strip, with the threshold for runway 28 about 140 feet lower than the threshold for runway 10. And it's not a constant slope either. As you can see here, the runway pitches up sharply about halfway down runway 28, so you don't want to land long here or things may get very interesting very, very quickly. In fact, because of that dramatic slope, it's forbidden to depart on runway 28 or land on runway 10, though I think most sane pilots would come to that conclusion on their own. When taxiing for departure, be ready to gun the engine. I had to push it to 1900 RPM to get up the hill myself, and that was just with me aboard and a light fuel load. Taking off from runway 10 is an experience unlike any other, since you can only see a few hundred feet of runway before it completely disappears. Getting rolling here is definitely a leap of faith and a ton of fun. And our second most fun landing of the year was at the Grass Patch in Lovettsville, Virginia. So the Grass Patch is a private strip, and you absolutely need prior permission before flying in. The owner's contact information is in ForeFlight, so if you do want to visit, be sure to reach out to coordinate ahead of time. Or better yet, they also host a fly-in every fall, complete with flower bombing and an informal stool competition. It's a great opportunity to visit this gorgeous strip, meet great people, and check out some really cool airplanes. The runway here is in absolutely incredible shape. Beautiful grass and a nice smooth surface. It does have a few quirks that require a slightly higher degree of skill though. First of all, the runway has a dogleg about halfway down, so you need to be prepared to use that rudder to maintain centerline. It also has trees and even a house that come right up to the edge of the runway, so you'll definitely want to have a good comfort level flying in proximity to hazards. And the runway is about 2,200 feet long. Now that's not especially short, but it does make those trees at the departure end of runway 23 feel like they're coming at you real fast, so you want to be proficient with your short field technique as well. And that brings us to number 1, our most fun landing of 2025 at Heaven's Landing in Medley, West Virginia. This little strip has it all. Approaching from the east brings you across the top of Route 48 and through some beautiful mountain scenery. The runway sits on top of a little ridge top and has a pretty pronounced slope to it, so you want to land going uphill on runway 24. Now the strip has a declared length of 2,000 feet, but the first couple hundred of those are sharply curved, giving you about 1,800 feet of usable runway to work with. Landing uphill, though, slows you down pretty quick. Now, you do want to be careful about maintaining center line, since portions of the runway have pretty steep embankments on either side. Heaven's Landing is a destination unto itself, in the middle of some of West Virginia's prettiest scenery. It has a designated airplane camping site, so you can pitch your tent right under your wing. There are multiple cabins for rent just steps away from the runway, and there's even a hangar cabin if you'd prefer to sleep under the same roof as your airplane. The owner is a flight instructor, and you can even arrange for mountain and backcountry flying lessons during your stay. Now this is a private strip, and you do need prior permission before flying in. The owner's contact information is in the Recreational Aviation Foundation Airfield Guide, so reach out to coordinate in advance of your visit. The downhill slope on runway 6 gets you rolling pretty quick, and your departure takes you right over the Heaven's Landing RV campground and camp store at the bottom of the hill. This is definitely a strip worth visiting, and one you'll want to land at time and time again. Now, I'd be kicking myself if I didn't also give a shout out to Keller Brothers Airport just south of Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Keller Brothers was the first grass strip I ever landed at, so landing here always has a nostalgic feeling to it. The airport also brings you very close to a few other Pennsylvania grass gems: Farmer's Pride up in Fredericksburg and Grimes Field over in Bethel. So coming in here always sets you up for a great afternoon on some of the most pristine grass strips in the east, flying over some of the prettiest farmland around. The owners keep this field in absolutely immaculate condition, and it's even fully lighted to support night operations. Keller Brothers is also one of the few grass strips around with 24-hour self-service fuel available, and it even has dedicated taxiways. The runway does have a little bit of slope to it, but not enough to prevent you landing or taking off in either direction, depending on winds. This field is just a real privilege to land on, and one you definitely don't want to miss.
Yeah, I know. Throwing that honorable mention in there at the end is a cop-out. It's a top 11 list, not a top 10 list. Hey, but in my defense, 45 airports, they were all really fun to fly into. It was hard choosing 11, never mind just 10. But hey, as always, thanks for coming along in 2025. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching the channel. You're what makes this special, and you're what makes it worth doing. Here's to some great adventures in 2026 together. Hey, and if you know of any fun airports out there that you'd like to see me land at in the coming year, drop a note in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Happy New Year, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you in the year ahead.